minus 1 minute. T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorraine, and I am your moderator for this session titled Fiction as a Narrative Mirror. Welcome to the 28th edition of the Time of the Writer Festival, presented by the Center for Creative Arts. The festival is made possible with the support from the National Arts Council of South Africa, University of KwaZulu-Natal, the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, and the Dramatic, Artistic, and Literary Rights Organization. Now, let's welcome our two authors whose books are under discussion, Lindani Mbunyuza-Memani, as well as Siphiwe Gloria Ndlovu. Now, a little bit about our authors under the spotlight today. Lindani wrote the book, Buried in the Chest, which won the Jacana 2024 Dinaane Debut Award. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lindani. She has an MFA in creative writing from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and a doctoral degree in mass communication and media arts. She is a graduate in media studies from the Nelson Mandela University, and as I said, she is the 2024 winner of the Jacana Dinaane Debut Fiction Award, and the book under discussion is her first book, Buried in the Chest. Joining her is Siphiwe Gloria Ndlovu, whose fourth book, The Creation of Half-Broken People, was published last year. And Gloria was born in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. She is the author of a trilogy of novels, the first being the best-selling The Theory of Flight, winner of the 2019 Sunday Times Fiction Prize, and currently a school set work in South Africa. This was followed by the acclaimed The History of Man, and then The Quality of Mercy, with the former winning the prestigious Wyndham Campbell Prize. Ndlovu's work is published in South Africa and North America and has been translated in Arabic as well as Italian. Now, Gloria and Lindani, welcome and thank you so much for having you in this conversation this afternoon.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Time of the Writer.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Now, by way of introducing this session, I'm quickly going to let everyone know how the session is going to work. We have, approximately 60 minutes where we are going to take a deep dive into the two novels, obviously looking at the various themes that run parallel in both novels. And then thereafter, we are going to open the session with a Q&A. Please use the comment section on the Facebook to either pose a question that you have for both Gloria and Lindani, as well as a comment that you would like to make referring to their work. Now, Gloria, I am going to start with you, and then it's the same question, and thereafter Lindani can jump in. Can you briefly tell us about the creation of Half-Broken People, and whether it is different from your first 3 books?
I'm sorry, Lorraine, I didn't get your question. Sorry.
Oh, you didn't. Sorry.
Yes,
No,
right.
my question it's the same question to both you and Lindani. A brief synopsis of the book under discussion, The Creation of Half-Broken People, and how different is it from the first 3 books?
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll just say now that I seem to have a very unstable connection, so I think it's a little tricky going forward. But so The Creation of Half-Broken People is a novel about a woman who is searching for her own story to tell. She is someone who's disconnected from her past. She doesn't really have the connections that she would like to have to her past, but she doesn't know this at the beginning of the novel. And then she starts seeing visions from 3 different women. And those women sort of like guide her towards an understanding of herself and her place in the world. How is it different from the first 3 novels? Well, the first 3 novels are a trilogy that really look at Zimbabwe's history, mostly political and social. And this novel is in many ways connected to them. Is sort of like maybe the novel that starts with everything that you read in the past 3 novels in many ways. And so all of them are set in the City of Kings. And this novel also is set in the City of Kings, and kind of like tells us also through the story of the narrator, the story of the beginning of the City of Kings. And the City of Kings, of course, is Bulawayo, Zimbabwe.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that spirited response. Now, Lindani, this is your first novel. Can you just briefly give us synopsis of the novel, as well as, what motivated this story?
Thank you so much. I noticed an overlap between Gloria's explanation about the creation of the half-broken people and the presence of this character who is searching for herself. In Buried in the Chest, Unati is also on a journey. She's trying to figure out who she is, her own place in the world, but also she is practically searching for her mother, because she was raised by her grandmother and with a lot of secrets about who her mother is, or who, her lineage. And so when her grandmother dies, Unati is left without this knowledge that she's been seeking. And so she goes on this journey to try and find her mother. But the book predominantly tells the story of families that were broken because of the apartheid system, but also because of cultural practices in African rural settings. And so the story is set in a small village somewhere in South Africa. And I'm imagining the village that raised me, Edwidwa. But the village is fictionalized as Moya, and that too tells the story of how Black people were moved to make space for white people. And so it's a story about race, it's a story about sexual identity, because Unathi is also trying to figure out who she is as a young woman who falls in love with another girl, but later on falls in love with a man. And so it's a story of trying to figure out who the self is, but it's set in this background of brokenness and this time of South Africa being broken by these oppressive systems that were also very violent. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindani, for also your very, very spirited response. And, you know, when reading these two books, because I read them back to back in preparation of this conversation, and, you know, one can't help but pick up that, you know, we are so much more connected. We are so much more similar. We have similar history as a people, and the stories that we tell not only speak to us as individuals, but these are stories that impact families, that impact communities, that impact nations, and so much more important for us to speak about these things. Now, in reading both of these stories, the first thing that really jumped out to me, and it has also been a broader conversation, especially here in South Africa, is the mother wound. You know, we have Unathi here, who is raised by her grandmother, a grandmother who is not only Unathi's grandmother, but is a mother whose daughter disappeared. But then she is holding Mavis so close to her heart that Mavis has become a stranger to Unathi. And on the other hand, in the creation of half-broken people, Gloria, we have our unnamed character who meets a man at age 21, and so many things happen spearheaded by her mother. And I mean, this is in the first two chapters of the book, that she suddenly has 3 children within a space of 8 years. And these are not babies that she willingly conceived. These are not babies that she wanted to birth. And these are not babies that she necessarily wanted to have. So I would like us to have a broader conversation around motherhood and what inadequate mothering does, not only to girls, but I'm going to speak about girls because Unathi is a girl and our unnamed character is also a girl. And also because it has been such a spirited conversation, especially across social media platforms, you know, the impact of inadequate mothering, and that does to us as adults, as female adults. Yeah, let's start with you. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I often worry about how I label women or the words that I use to conceptualize what I think about women. And I think because I'm a mother and my daughter is a teenager now, so I'm constantly thinking about the dynamics of our relationship. So Unathi, so I think about Mavis. Mavis, we don't know if Mavis wanted to parent Unathi, wanted to, you know, to fulfill this role of motherhood. But we do know that this role is removed from Mavis. And so Mavis doesn't feature in Unathi's life, although Unathi has this sort of romantic idea or this hope of what her life would have been like had her mother been present in her life. But she's not lacking in terms of maternal presence. because I think one of the things that Buried in the Chest tries to do, and I've seen it too in the creation of Half Broken People. Yes, I was in South Africa last month, and so I found your book. There's the presence of community, and sometimes the community is not just a community of women, right? In Broken and Buried in the Chest, for example, there's Mr. Buso, who fulfills this paternal role in Unati's life, is loving, is kind, is present, in the way in which, sometimes Black or African men are not characterized in stories. And so I think, yes, I think a lot about inadequate motherhood, but I also think about there is so much inadequacy that I feel or that I notice in myself too, in the ways in which I am present or absent in my daughter's life, or in the ways in which I am not sure whether a response I gave, how she thinks about that. And so, but in the broader conversation, I think too, there's so much that has been placed on the shoulders of mothers, that there's an expectation that mothers will be soft, will be present, will be kind, will shoulder the bulk of the load, right? To the extent that perhaps fathers, as it happens in Moya, fathers tend to be placed on the side and to be celebrated. Now I see sometimes on Facebook men carrying their babies on their back, and there's this big ululation. I'm like, but why? I was talking to a friend last week about why even the language that we use, right, to talk about fathers who are present in their kids' life. It's like, oh, what a miracle. When a father lets the mother, right, that language allows the mother to go out with her friends, like the father's doing this huge favor and is babysitting. We don't use the same language to talk about mothers, right? And so sometimes I worry even about the direction our conversations take, in how we conceptualize the role of mothers. I'll stop there. Thank you.
And I'd like to just pick up where Unati left off. I think Lindani left off. I'm not talking about you as though you're your character, but like, it seems to me that there is this tension in our societies where there's this idea of a community that raises a child, which is good, which is nice, right? But then which sort of like maybe takes away the actual parenting from the people who are supposed to parent, or the people that we've come to think are supposed to parent, which are the two parents who bring forth this child. And as Lindani just said, this is an expectation that is brought to bear mostly on the mothers, on the women. And this is something that is historical because I think during colonization or during apartheid for South Africa, there's this understanding that the men are going to go work this hard, toiling labor for the state. And then the women are supposed to be the ones who, even though they also go to work, but are also supposed to be the ones who take care of the children. And if that's just a grandmother or a mother, this is good. This is like the feminine energy that children are supposed to grow around. But then we also know that in our cultures, in our societies, women also had to go to work. And so you have this person having to have these two roles. No one sees them as two roles of both being a mother and a worker. And so it's this sort of like double burden of trying to be both, where you're only seen as doing the one thing, which is the parenting or being the parent. And also there's this added pressure, I think, about, what a good woman is. And I think historically, since at least for the past 100 years, that good woman has to be, if she's a mother, she has to be a good mother. If she's married, she has to be a good wife. There's this idea of goodness that's inherent in being sort of like a Southern African woman. And if you're not, then, we don't necessarily know what to do with you except call you bad and mistaken and all those things. And so I think we've put a lot of pressure to bear on women. We've put a lot of pressure to bear on women who bear children. And so it is a good conversation to have, especially since I think in many ways, most of us, our own experiences of parenting are not from this European model of having a mother and a father, right? A lot of us have grandmothers and grow up in communities with extended families. And so the idea of mothering and motherhood and family and community is something that I think we are all trying to work through. And it doesn't mean that we don't have emotional wounds from the ways in which we are raised in these ways, but there's also a lot to celebrate. But I think it is raising a lot of questions as we move forward and have these other ideas of family and community.
Thank you so much, both. I mean, I am so loving the responses, and you know, they also force further reflections, especially around what both of you covered. Now, I would like us to talk about the reflections of social and historical realities in both your novels. Now, Lindani, I would like us to, okay, both of you, I want us to talk about erasure. Unathi has further along the novel, I think in 3/4 of the story, Unathi and Gerald meet at a protest. That is around the upcoming Truth and Reconciliation hearing. And Gerald then starts speaking about an aunt of his who disappeared. And that's what he uses. He uses that word. He says his aunt disappeared. But then when Unathi speaks about her mom, Mavis, you know, when Unathi speaks about her mom Mavis, she says her mom was erased. Not only did she disappear, she was also erased. Now, I would like us to talk about the ways in which, as families, we hold memories and we remember those that are no longer physically with us, and how those messages are then conveyed or passed to the kids in the family. Yeah, Lindani, let's start with you and speak about how Gogo spoke or did not speak about Mavis, Unathi's mom, with or to Mavis because of this whole sense of erasure.
Ugogo was she reminds me of, you know, when I was much younger, some of my friends who were raised by either their grandmothers or their mothers in the absence of fathers would tell stories of how their own mothers respond to questions when they ask about who's my father. And mothers would say, "Mama, you know, I'm both," and it's not possible. It's not possible. And so when I was writing, I was thinking a lot about these responses that concealed, you know, that erased a part of a child's identity by, you know, by keeping that a secret. And so Ugogo, Unad, she tells the story this way, that Gogo would snatch Mavis's name from the mouths of those who tried to mention Unad's mother. And so almost Mr. Buso lets it slip this one time while he's visiting, and Ugogo is unhappy with that. And so I think sometimes when a person is wounded, When a person does not know perhaps how to explain an experience to themselves, when they don't know how to talk about it, perhaps to the self, then they also don't have a language to talk to somebody else about how they feel. Because ugogo, we can tell when Unati is thinking about her, she talks about how Gogo kept things in her chest and how these traveled all the way down and settled on her ankles, right? So we can tell that she had some illnesses that she had as a result of poverty, of course, but also the absence of her own daughter in her life, and the ways in which she chose to deal with that absence. Now, of course, this is a practice in the village, and so she's not the only one. But at no point do we hear in the story that grandmothers would sometimes meet and talk about their daughters. And so this absence, and so the children too grow up not only with this absence that is physical, but also this absence of a language to talk about what a person feels, or how it feels to be raised by a grandmother when you don't even know if your mother is still alive, because also there are these stories that Unati then later on, as she grows up, hears about farm murders, which is a big thing now. That is raised in the context of white people being killed, but in the story, it's black people actually, because apartheid was that violent, and sometimes I think we forget that. And so that erasure that is so violent, that afflicts the body, but it's also so deeply emotional and scarring. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lindani, for your response. Now, Gloria, I would like us to talk again about erasure and personal trauma that is visited on the main character, our unnamed character, especially in the beginning of the novel. She's quite young. She falls in love with a very abusive man, and there's a moment you describe there. I mean, this man has already beaten her up twice, and you say that the only reason he did not beat her up the third time is because he died. And I mean, I found that very, 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 very shocking. I'm laughing now, but in hindsight, one can't help but imagine herself as this young, vibrant 21-year-old with rose-tinted glasses, and the world is her oyster, and there are so many possibilities, but the violence that is visited on her, both emotionally and psychologically, and also physically, is something really, really shocking. So no, I would like us to speak about that, as well as the trauma stemming from all that, and how does then one start navigating a recovery, if ever one is able to be free enough to think of recovering from that.
Yes, I think that for me that these things are connected in slightly different ways from Dindane's work. I think the trauma is from what we spoke about earlier, that the named character in this novel doesn't actually know what a good relationship looks like. Hold on, sorry. Someone's starting a car. I'm sorry. She doesn't know what a good relationship looks like because of the very troubled relationship she has with her own mother. And so she mistakes a lot of cues for being maybe affection or maybe being interested in someone, or so she's misreading a lot of a lot of the what is happening in her relationship with this abusive person, because she is from a very young age in very abusive relationships and within her own very intimate space of a family with her mother and her father. Both her mother and her father treat her rather badly, and so she's just looking to connect to people, and so she has to grow into a space within herself where she knows how to look for very healthy cues. She knows how to want a healthy relationship. So her trauma is such that she doesn't necessarily know how to read the world around her, and that's part of her journey in the novel. In terms of erasure, I think my real what I was really trying to unpack here was sort of like the women that we forget, right? The women who are not necessarily the way we remember women. So we tend to remember women as mothers and wives. And, this is mostly historically. Maybe now this has grown. I'm hoping now this has grown so that women can be a whole host of things. But if I think about my great-grandmother, and what I know about her is that she gave birth to people who then gave birth to other people that then led to me. What else she did as a person, whatever else she did, I don't know. Whereas perhaps my great-grandfather would have been like a hunter, and not necessarily just the father of the people that I sort of like come from. And so I was really interested in what gets erased in this notion of women that is so very boxed into just being mothers and wives. What about the work that women did? What about the kinds of things that women did in the past? And so during sort of like the beginning of the colonial time, a lot of women's roles also changed. Like a lot of them did go to work in the colonial space. It's just that the colonial space didn't have space or language to speak of their presence. And so they were erased in that way. But when you go into the archives, you find out that, quite a few women were doing very different kinds of things than what we receive as having been what women were. And I think there's a whole other way of thinking again about goodness that also erases the women. Culturally, traditionally, we think of women, for instance, who may have been deemed by the colonial people as prostitutes, as bad women. And so we also want to erase them and what they did. And yet what they were also doing was contributing a lot to the way the colonial system worked by providing shelter, food, all these things for this migrant labor force. And so we ourselves, through our own traditional speaking and thinking, erased as women, and the colonial system also erased as women. So it's also to sort of like bring those histories and those experiences back to light. Again, I'm really sorry about all the sound issues that happened. And right.
We can't hear the sound issues. You are loud and clear. Whatever else is happening around you, it's it's not coming through. I really liked what you said. The women we forget. I remember when I turned 40 and waking up, and I was so emotional because suddenly I thought of my mom as a 40-year-old, and I've never really looked at my mom and saw someone's daughter and saw a teenager and saw a young girl. Uma has always been Uma, and I unless she tells me her age, I've never really attached age and dreams and aspirations to my mother. And I woke up this one year, many years ago, and I was turning 40, and I got so emotional that, oh my God, I am 40 and I still have so much to do. I have done a lot. I still want to do a lot. And I remembered that, oh my God, my mother was once a 40-year-old who probably woke up and wanted to do so much, wanted 40 more years. And as you were speaking now, it brought me to the way Unati's not even the grandmother, but the way the community of Moya looked at young girls. Mavis had Unati and disappeared. But in their perception is because Mavis had a child out of wedlock, she was too ashamed to remain part of the community. So she just dumped the child and disappeared. Only later in life does Unathi then start thinking that, you know, maybe my mom wanted more than to be a mom to me. Maybe my mom joined the political arm and is out there and is zabalazing for the country. Now, Lindani, I would like to bring you into this conversation because there is a very pivotal moment that happens in the book that leads to that realization by Unathi, and she is propelled by forces then to not only view her mom as someone who not only ran away from home, who not only ran away from her daughter, but as someone who really wanted to be part of the political movement and do more with her life than staying at the village and taking care of a child. Not that it's not it's a thing. You know, it's a big thing. But she was more than a mom. She was more than a teenage mom.
Thank you. And actually, thanks, Gloria, too, for raising that point, because when I was writing, the way this world that I created, there's a particular way in which I wanted to tell the story of these women in a way that did not shame them for the choices that they had made, because I also am careful about agency, right? Women have agency, women have choices, and sometimes those choices are limited, right? And it was important for me. I mean, I actually was happy when this happened, when Unathi works at this high-end boutique for Black women, owned by a Black woman who had been part of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, and is fighting these demons, right? We know she's alcoholic and all of that, and that too was a way to say, look, to Gloria's point about this conceptualization of a good woman. You know, if you are married, how do you behave? If you're a mother, there are these boxes that we place you into. And so what happens? How do we think about a woman who doesn't want to do those things or who does not behave in those ways? And so I was also thinking about it, because in my thought process, this is also raised, right? And so there are ways in which white people look at Black people, or at least we're thinking about apartheid, the oppressions, and who was working for who and who had money. And some of we still live with the legacies right now. Wealth is still in white hands. And so, but in this boutique, the person who employs other women is a woman too, and it is in this space, right, where these women talk about their experiences and their frustrations with the TRC. It is them who guide Unathi on what to do, and they are open in the ways in which they talk about their missing loved ones, but also they think a lot, and I appreciated this. They think a lot about their own appearance, right? These are rural women, and they don't have much money, but they are careful. They understand, how the representation of the self, what that communicates, what that looks like. And so Unathi meets these women, and they guide her. They remind her of her own desires to find her mother. And the other thing about Unathi is she's in college, and so she's not confined to this life where she will grow up in Moya and end up in Moya, and back to the idea of community, it is Mr. Buso who convinces her that she needs that college qualification and, and guides her on this path. And so there's this interconnectivity and interdependence that I really wanted to highlight and to emphasize in Unati's story. Thank you.
Thank you for your response, Lindani. And I like how you brought agency in a woman's life, and how that can be a double-edged sword. I would like us to talk about that concept of choice being a double-edged sword for the female character, the female lead in the two stories, and how that is reflected then in their journeys, not only towards independence, but also towards self-acceptance.
So I think for my character, the entire journey is really about self-acceptance, because I think what she learns from these women who come before her, that she finally meets through these visions, is that, in order to make choices, like healthy choices, you first need to know yourself, right? And so if you don't know yourself, if you are working on an assumption that's not real about yourself, which I think a lot of us, especially women, because of what society mirrors back to us, we're usually working with assumptions about ourselves that may or may not be true. And then that's what we use to make choices. And so I think the lesson for this particular character in this novel is to know herself fully, and then also use that then to make a choice that is good for her. And I think you mentioned before, Lorraine, that, she, in the very first pages of the novel, finds herself being a mother, not by choice, right? Because other people have chosen this for her. And so she's trapped in many ways because other people are doing the choosing, and she is not necessarily strong enough within herself to make those choices. And so her journey really is the self-knowledge that will lead to her making a choice that is healthy for her. And that's what happens at the end of the novel.
Lindani, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I think Unati is also not aware of, I picked this up from Gloria's explanation, this idea of the self as fragmented, right? The self as not necessarily fully formed and fully knowing all the time. When I was writing, I thought a lot about Toni Morrison's work. How Toni Morrison chose to write African American women. And I was thinking a lot about Sula's character in the book of the same name, right? Sula behaves like how she wants to behave. Now, Unati is young, of course, but Unati has this desire to do what she wants to do. And to an extent, she kind of does. But choice is also, when I think about choice, I think about how even the idea of choice, sometimes I used to teach at the School of Advertising. And so I had to explain to students that when they say, oh, but I have a choice too, I'm like, no, understand that you are choosing from pre-chosen items, right? And so understand that choices are not unlimited. And sometimes, so you will say, but we have cars. Okay, you choose from what is available, right? And so also this idea of creativity, I'm digressing, but this idea of creativity is, that part two is bound up in what you already know. So it's not, so what do we mean when we talk about that? But in any case, Unathi makes these choices in a space that constrains the choices. And so how do you navigate? How do you navigate life during this, Unathi's time is post-apartheid, the immediate aftermath of the 1994 elections in South Africa. And so even the freedom of movement is constrained. She has to think a lot about how she accesses Fred, this place where she discovers is where her mother might be, right? And so she has to agree to rely on Gerald, who has to pass. And to do that, I was trying to unpack this concept because it was big in South Africa during apartheid. In fact, maybe we still live with those legacies, but what does it mean to pass as a white person? You know, how do you, I was conscious of this decision actually when I was writing. Why is it that I'm allowing a young Black woman who is aware, who is finding herself? Why is it that it is a man who passes one gender, so a man, but who passes race as white, who helps her access this space that is closed off, that continues to be closed off to people who look like her? And so, yeah, and so choice, I like thinking about choice because I have to make choices too as a writer, you know, and then think about the choices that readers will make as they interpret the story. But yeah, there's a lot of choosing, but there's a lot of understanding that choice itself is constrained and it's not unlimited.
So, ladies, you are leaving me with more questions than answers. I never looked at choice like that, Lindani. Somehow, I always thought free will, free will, free will. But what you said, that we are choosing from already chosen items. Never told. Hey, I am shocked. I, I am shocked, shocked, shocked. Oh yeah, we still have quite a bit of time. One of the three last themes, time permitting, that I would like us to explore in both these books is using fiction as a tool for healing and self-discovery. Lindani, I am going to start with you. Yeah, Gerald, and because you know Gerald lost his mom as well, but that is something that he really does not talk about, and it is in the beginning. It is such a big thing for Unathi, because Unathi constantly wants to know about her mom, but Gerald really, that is an avenue that he stays away from. Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about absence and what absence does to the mind. And I think absence can be romanticized, right? I think about how some of my friends who were raised by single parents think of this, or sometimes went through phases where they didn't like the parent who's present, right? Because this is the person who disciplines and who does all these kinds of things. But then the parent who shows up sometimes when they have money or when they can make time, and shows up with a bicycle or a box of chocolates or whatever it is, then the child will gravitate towards that parent. And so, but so Unathi yearns for her mother because she has no clue who Mavis is, except, and so on the flip side, Gerald knows his mother, right, and is ashamed to talk about his mother because his mother struggled with mental illness, right? But Gerald does not even have the language to explain how being raised in a home with a mother that struggled with mental illness, what that looked like. And so it appears as though, you know, he doesn't want to talk about his mother, but the tension there is, which is what gets me to this idea of how absence sometimes, you know, you are attracted. Often humans are attracted to what they do not know, and maybe that's uncertainty reduction if we think about that theory. And so Gerald is searching for his aunt because his aunt went missing when she was young, but he has no desire to know more about the mother because the mother was present in his life until his early teenage years. And so, how do we talk about shame? How do we talk as families about our family members who struggle with mental illness? And so that's what I'm convinced. I'm convinced that that's what Gerald is struggling with in his own search for who he is as a boy, as a man, young man raised by a mother who struggled with mental illness, whether or not he conceptualizes that as mental illness, because he talks about how people and how how his father spoke about his mother. So there's the softness there in how the father loved the mom, but we don't get the same kind of idea in how Gerald thought of his mother. And so he's searching for what he knows, but for what he doesn't know, which is the aunt, but what he knows, he's ashamed to talk about because of the experiences. Thanks.
Gloria, would you also come in to along the line, not even the line, the theme of healing in your story, but I also want to bring in the element of mental unwellness in families, as alluded in Lindani's response. And for me, really, the beginning of the creation of half-broken people really took center stage for me, because I still say that the good family, you know, they were not well. They themselves were not well at all, and that unwellness led to the way the story unfolded. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, and thanks to Lindani for bringing up the issue of mental health, because I think, you know, when Lorraine speaks about the good family really stands in the novel for the process of colonization itself and the sort of like relationship that Africa has with Great Britain, but also Europe and the West in general. And so I think when you say that the good family is unwell, what we were really saying is that colonialism itself was a very unhealthy thing. And so when we respond with mental health issues, that actually is part of the process of being colonized, right? And so I think the shame that we are carrying is so embedded in the colonial experience itself, right? And so there's no way what happens mentally and physically to the colonized person can just be something that we withstand because we're strong. There's no strength that can withstand that. And so I think when we talk about healing, I think what I'm hearing from what Lindani is saying, and definitely what I was trying to do with the creation of Half-Broken People, is that when we confront the very violence that we've had to live through, that we've inherited as people who've come after sort of like maybe these pivotal moments, apartheid and colonization, but it's not like in the post of those things, we don't have the ramification of those things. And so when the way we heal is by confronting it, by saying, yes, it was really that terrible. Yes, these things, horrible things happened. Yes, people were changed physically, emotionally, and mentally. Yes, we still suffer physically, emotionally, and mentally because of what happened in our past, because it still carries on into the present. And how we heal is by saying it out loud, that this is what happened. And so when we read and when we see, and when, just from this conversation, it's so very clear that these two novels have a lot in common, a lot in common. So our two countries, and just as two countries in the world, have shared these very violent inheritances that have to be spoken, that have to be addressed, right? We have to find ways to make them things that we talk about, that we make sure we understand as people who went through it, make sure we understand it so that we make sure we don't make the people that are coming after us inherit these things as well. Thanks.
So ladies, what were you reading when you were writing these stories? Who were you reading? What were you reading? Or was it just too traumatic to pick up another book? How did you decompress? How did you come back to your non-writer self? Because I mean, clearly, as you can see, Mina, a whole reader, I'm still very, very traumatized.
I usually make it a point not to read when I'm writing. I try very hard not to, but I think this time around I had to, because the novel itself is intertextualizing all these other novels, and so I had to read those novels and engage with them. But what I do really, in order not to be in the world of, especially if it's a very horrible and difficult world that I'm writing about, is I tend to watch something that I'm very familiar with, maybe something that I watched as a teenager, some show from the 90s or 2000s that I really loved. And then I'm in that world, and I'm, happy again that way. But this time around, I had to really contend with the other works that I'm intertextualizing in the novel. So I didn't have that reprieve. But yeah, that's how I usually.
I wrote this book as part of my MFA program, and so I had to read a lot. I was reading a lot of work by women writers, and I'm intentional about that. The only thing, though, that I see as a lack in myself is because of where I live, right? It is sometimes hard to find works of authors like, oh, Gloria, but now I've found ways, right? And so when I'm home, I'm constantly looking, and I'm intentional about that. And so I was reading stories, for example, running another story. So I went through a short story writing workshop. Although I ended up writing a novel, I broke the program's rules. And so I was reading a lot of African American women writers, Abo Zorani Lestin. I read a lot of white women writers too, so that I'm not boxed in my own thinking. I like Asian women writers, and so I was reading a lot of that literature. But to decompress, and I was watching South African documentaries too. Paid a lot on YouTube to access those materials. When I was working on my poetry collection, though, I read a lot of TRC documents. For this book too, I did a little bit of reading, and that fascinated me so much that I ended up doing an erasure project using the TRC documents. But to decompress, I tend to talk to myself. I talk to myself a lot. You would think that there are 10 people in the room, but I'm alone. I throw parties for myself too in the basement. I spend a lot of time alone. My husband works a typical job, and my kids are at school. Because I teach, professors don't teach every day. This semester I teach 2 days a week, and so even today I'm home. After this conversation, there's a party downstairs that I'm throwing for myself. I watch a lot of crime shows, and that's how I get myself back to myself.
Wow, I want your life. I mean, working 2 days, throwing parties. Oh my God, that is the dream. That is the dream. Is there anything else that okay, let's make this fun. Lindani, if you had one question for Gloria, what would it be? And Gloria, if you had one question for Lindani, what would it be?
I teach literature, so I often talk to my students about the importance of that first sentence or where the story begins. I'm fascinated by Gloria's choice to begin the story like she does, and I'll read. There was a time before this, that I read that sentence and I was like, whoa, so I already can tell as a reader that we are going to go somewhere. I'm going to learn more. There's so much history that is going to be embedded here, but I'm interested in the choice of where the story begins. And I mean, I'm not done reading the book because it's thick, and school is in session now, and so I'm teaching. So I've got other pieces of text to read. But up until the part I'm at, the character is not named. And so sometimes I think a lot about naming and about the choice of not naming characters. Could you talk a little bit about your choice to not name the character, if at all she's not named until the last? Oh, and you wrote her mother stunningly. What was your inspiration for writing the mother? So many questions. I'm sorry. I'll stop there.
Now, apparently we've run out of time, but I will answer the mother question. I think it really stems from, tapping into my own, because I'm not a mother, but I do know that this can be a very fraught relationship, the one between mothers and daughters, and it's a journey. I remember as a teenager slamming a lot of doors because of something that was going on between me and my mom. And yet now, she's my best friend. And so it was interesting to me just to think about that relationship not evolving, always being in that very fraught space. And I just thought that would be so difficult and so oppressive and wouldn't allow for much growth. But just to wrap it up, I have to ask you your question. So my question to you is just one question, Lindani. Like, how did Unathi appear to you? Like, what was the first thing and you thought this is a character in a novel?
Unathi, so Buried in the Chest is a sequel. The prequel is still in draft phase. I wrote the prequel during workshop when I was in the MFA program. And then my fall fiction writing professor asked me, who's searching for Mavis? Because that story is about Mavis, Unathi's mother. And so I wrote Unathi as a response to that question, because I realized that in the Black community, when somebody is missing, somebody is searching for them. And so Unathi goes through this journey searching for Mavis, because there's a prequel that focuses a lot on Mavis and her experiences as a mother who works in this very white dominant space.
Time really flies when you are having a great time. Thank you so much, Lindani. Thank you so much, Gloria. One last question. Where can readers find your book?
Well, my books are sold mostly in South Africa, and they can be found in every major bookstore. The book is going to be published in the US in April, so it'll be available in the US and in North America in April. Yes.
Buried in the Chest is also available in major bookstores. I know Exclusive Books has copies. I forget the other bookstores, but in Johannesburg, bookstores in the Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape, and in KwaZulu-Natal. I have a long list. I should have looked at that. It is currently only published in South Africa now, but it's also in the period of 2 years will be translated into French, German, Italian, Dutch, and Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Time of the Writer, for this really, really spirited conversation. Not forgetting our partners, National Arts Council of South Africa, University of KwaZulu-Natal, KwaZulu-Natal Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, as well as Dramatic, Artistic and Literary Rights Organization. Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you so much, Lindani, and everyone who was here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.